Definitely a matcha green tea type of day. All of that snow that we got the other day is gone. We got our one snow day a year, and now it's over and it's back towards 50s and 60s. I really wanted to get out to Lake Roberts, which is where I go for, it's like the only place I can go. It's relatively close for good waterfowl and winter ducks and stuff. And I really wanted to get them like in the snow. Missed my chance, couldn't get up there. Anyways, on that note, the biggest question that I've been getting for the past month, since I've done the last couple of videos I did with the teleconverters and the 1 to 400 and the 800, is how the heck do teleconverters work on this? This is my 1 to 500, the RF 1 to 500, and that's sketchy. I was hoping I could do like a full video, like an actual video out in the field with like a lot more examples and good stuff. But I just didn't get that chance because I had so much going on and I had 3 other videos to film and I only had a week with those teleconverters that I rented. So that video got put on the back burner, and you guys still just keep, like, so many people just keep asking me questions about it. So I figured I'm going to, at least if I can't make an entire video, like a real better quality video, I can at least do this Q&A and try to answer. I did get to shoot with the 1 to 500 with both the 1.4 and the 2X RF teleconverters. So I do have a few example images. I have a lot of thoughts. I did get to use it over that week. And I'm going to just kind of go over, I'm not going to compare it to anything. This isn't going to be a comparison video. I think the only thing that I might compare it to, it would be that guy. I can't reach him. He's back there. It's the 800, the RF 800. I have many, many videos on the 800, with the 800, about the 800. So you can check those out if you enjoy the wildlife stuff or you want to see more about the 800 specifically. But a lot of people want to know. So one, you guys want to know how the RF 1 to 500 performs with the teleconverters, both the 1.4 and the 2X. And then more specifically, a lot of people are asking, how does that compare? The RF 100 with the 1.4 is 700 millimeters f10. So that's really close to the 800 f11. And a lot of people, I think, want to know which route they should go. Is it worth having the 800 f11? Is the 1 to 500 so good that it's still even better? Is it more versatile? How is the AF performance? All of that stuff. So I'm going to go over a few of my thoughts on teleconverters in general. So before I get into this, I have said this so many times, but if you're new to the channel, or if you just forgot or just don't think about these kind of things in general, it is so important to understand the use of a teleconverter, or the intended use of a teleconverter. I cannot iterate enough that physics is not your friend here when we're adding teleconverters. Physics is not your friend when we're talking about wildlife and birding and all that stuff in general. Teleconverters are not intended for, oh, look at that bird across the pond, or oh, look at that wolf that's half a mile away. It's too far away, let me put my teleconverter on. That is not the intended use for a teleconverter. Teleconverters are really intended for those times when you just want to get that fraction of a percentage closer to fill the frame, or to get a little more detail, even, you know, a tighter headshot or something like that. They're just for those kind of things. They're intended for those type of things. When animals are too far away, you're shooting through atmospheric distortion, you're shooting through the atmosphere, you're shooting through heat haze, which is, heat haze is a real thing, even in higher elevations, even in the winter time, even when it's not super hot outside. And the farther your subject is away from you, the more you're going to struggle with the atmosphere, and the more you're going to struggle with AF, with your autofocus. You know, even if you have the IAF from these amazing Canons, and all of that stuff. And even if you have spot focus and you're right in the center and you got those crosshairs and you think you nailed it, when the farther away you get, the harder it is for that autofocus to be really precise on something that's getting smaller and smaller in the frame. And then you couple that with the atmospheric distortions and all of that stuff, and it's just physics and real world use is just not your friend, like I keep saying. And I'm going to prove that. So let's jump into the computer, and I'm going to start off with looking at some better but not great examples of how you would want to use, I guess mediocre examples of how you would want to use a teleconverter. So I've got this sequence here of this awesome Northern Harrier. And this Northern Harrier was about 30 feet away from me. So you can see down here my edited images, but let's just take a look at, this is the raw. So all I've done is just a little bit of, I just added a little bit of saturation and a pinch of dehaze, that's it. No clarity, no sharpening, anything like that. So that's 100%. This is the 500 with the 2x teleconverter at 1000 millimeters. We're looking at f14 ISO 800. So we have really good light. That's the other thing that you want to keep in mind, is teleconverters need a lot of light, especially on slower lenses like this one. You can see if we start zooming back out, 66%, that's looking really good. And then back out 33%. So the less we zoom in, the better this is looking, and the details look fantastic. You can tell that I nailed focus on the eye. Everything looks great. The light is what's helping this image the absolute most, that and the distance. 30 feet is pushing it for me. I would really prefer to be closer, because I know I want to crop this image anyways, and I did, because you can see here, this is the full version, or the cropped version of how I would have wanted to frame the shot. So I would have preferred to be that close regardless, but you can't get that close sometimes. So that's example number one, and it's really, if you were to just see that, you might think, holy cow, teleconverters might be worth it. But let's just keep looking. Okay, so here's the same bird, and you can see this body of water here. This bird's about to fly, and it hopped the body of water. Now it's twice as far away. Now it's 60 feet away. So let's take a look at one of these, and let's see. So you'll notice the focus is a little soft, and in this situation, this is distance. This is a problem. So a couple of things that I did, we're still stopped down, and that helps. You know, we're still at f14. I upped the ISO a little bit because I upped the shutter speed a little bit because he took off. So that's where you're seeing like the grain and stuff. But in terms of overall detail, we're suffering. We're starting to suffer here. And that is due to distance, that's due to the atmosphere, and that's due to the autofocus. So this is, you know, if you were to not crop this image and maybe just leave it like that and then edit it, then it might be usable. But cropping into that is going to hurt you, and that's where you're going to start seeing the teleconverter suffer. All right, so here is probably the best example that I've ever had with a teleconverter, and this is, in terms of image quality, in terms of overall image, it's not a great image because it's just a headshot of a red-tailed hawk in a really busy tree. But in terms of detail and lighting and everything, this is fantastic. We can see, here's the raw, I mean, it's been edited. All I did was, again, up the contrast and the saturation and stuff like that a little bit. But we can see this raw, and we can see there is 100%. That is incredible detail. You can see it's still a little softer. Like if I would have used my 800, I probably could have got better detail. But for punching in 100% on with a 2x teleconverter on a slow zoom, this detail is incredibly relatively impressive. That's what I say, relatively impressive. And here's the edited version, just right up in its grill. That's probably the best I could ever hope for personally out of a teleconverter. out of a 2x teleconverter on the RF 100 to 500. All right, so let's just jump into some horrible, horrible. Also, I should mention this bird, you'll notice all these raws, these are uncropped. So this is 1,000 millimeters. That bird was very close to me. This was 15 feet from me. And that's about as good of a scenario as you could ever ask for wild. This is not baited. This is not, this is completely wild in every way, shape, and form. And that's about the best scenario you could ever ask for, except for all these stupid branches in the way. All right, but let's just jump into some of this not so good stuff. So here is this beautiful wild bacon. We call these javelinas in New Mexico. They are adorable. I love them. They live all over southern New Mexico. This is like one of the worst shots I've ever got of them. So this one was probably 60 feet away from me again, which is too far away. We're at 1,000 millimeters, f/16, 1/1600th of a second, which should be enough to freeze any slow moving that this guy is doing. If you don't zoom in, it's looking okay. But when you zoom in, that's 50%. So we're seeing it's just atrocious image quality. So we're seeing poor focus. And again, this is really hard to focus on anyways. So I had it just focused on his head here because obviously IAF is not going to work. But we're just seeing huge amounts of image quality loss. We're seeing softness, all of that. We're seeing a lack of contrast, everything. And I've got it stopped down. I'm at f/16, and that's just looking absolutely horrible. So this is a great example of this animal was way too far away and I shouldn't have bothered. Like, obviously I just took this image for this test anyways. It's not something I would do anything with, but there it is. So you can see, and this is the same teleconverter and roughly the same settings and everything. So here you're seeing a little bit more contrast, which gives initially the illusion of slightly sharper images, but it's not. So it's just as soft. Here's a perfect example of what people generally think of for teleconverters. This bald eagle on this thing, I mean, this thing is like, all right, so here we go. Here's a bufflehead, super cool ducks. Again, this one's probably 40 to 50 feet away. The lighting's not great. You can't see any of his iridescence. We zoom in 100% and we're getting some motion blur issue because he's moving and my shutter's slow. But we're also getting a little bit of maybe not that great of AF and a little bit of atmospheric distortion. So this is, again, just no bueno in my opinion. Too far away for the 1.4. I mean, that's the thing you got to realize. If you're shooting at 700 millimeters, 1,000 millimeters, because you've got the 1.4, the 2x on or whatever, and you're shooting at these really long focal lengths, and these birds still aren't filling the frame, or even filling half the frame, you're too far away. Like, it's just that simple. This was ridiculous. As you can see, I tried many shots to get this kestrel, and you can see these images right here are the 500 without any teleconverters. So this is how far it was away at 500. And I could not focus on it at all. It just wouldn't focus. And it's not to say that it couldn't focus, but that shooting through that much atmosphere, like, look at that distortion. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing the heat haze there. Now this shot is at 700 millimeters with the 1.4 on, and you can see I'm closer, but then when we zoom in, you can see it's still just complete garbage. Another perfect example of how not to use the teleconverter. When you see a bird this far away, just don't even bother. Unless you're trying to take pictures for ID purposes, for identification, you can zoom in on this and you can tell, oh, that's a kestrel. There's enough of the markings there that you can look it up and figure it out. But if you're taking this for photography purposes, there's just no way that's usable. So here we are again. Now we're looking at 1,000 millimeters. These cranes are probably 60 to 80 feet away. You could see I misfocused completely on the crane and it just wouldn't get off this goose. But you can see here, at first glance, this looks pretty good. When we zoom in, it's looking not so good. So that's where we're seeing that loss of image quality from the softness on the 2x and from the atmospheric distortion. Again, a lot of that's going to be atmospheric distortion. These are still fairly far away, even for a bigger bird. If you're not going to crop and you're going to leave it like this, then that's a usable image in my opinion. With some editing and some cleaning up, that could be edited into a usable image, like these ones here. So this is one of the better shots I got of the 2x, so 1000 millimeters on the 500. And again, if I crop in, we can see this softness is all atmosphere. That's heat haze, that's atmospheric distortion. He's too far away. But if I leave it like this and I don't crop it and I edit it just a little bit, I could pull that into a semi-usable image, at least by my standards, for social media and whatnot. All right, so let's look. It's a different day, different lake, different area. This is one of the better shots I could get out of the 2x this day, and this bird was probably 50 feet away or so. So we're at 1000 millimeters with the 2x, f16, ISO 4000, 12/50th of a second. I should note it was really windy this day. So let's look at the raw. Again, I've just only tweaked the saturation and just a couple of little things, because this is 100%, and that's relatively impressive. We are seeing some image quality loss from the high ISO, because the higher ISO you go, the softer your images will get, and the noisier, of course, and you can see all that. But I will clean that noise up, and I think that the light on this and everything is good enough to make this a usable image, especially if we're not cropping in. If we're cropping into something like that, that's only a 30% crop, and that's looking pretty darn good. So with the 2x teleconverter on there. So you can see here, that's the edited image from what I cropped, and I noted that that's a 50% crop. So I'm relatively happy with that in terms of image quality and image usability, at least for my Instagram page. And this is more in line of the far end of what you would want to use a teleconverter for. I would still prefer him to be closer. I would prefer to have this framing without having to crop. And if I could get this framing with the teleconverter without having to crop, then I would be close enough to start getting good details and minimize atmospheric distortion and maximize focusing capabilities. So now we're getting into, you can see how far away this was, probably again about 40 feet. So now you can see this is the uncropped, this is with the 1.4 at 700 millimeters. Still too far away, probably about 30 feet or so, but we can see when we crop in, it's looking better. So the 1.4 is again a little bit sharper. We're at f10, 2000 ISO, which is kind of high, but we can certainly make this work. So we can see here is the cropped version and the cropped and edited version. And that's all I would want to crop to that. But again, that's a potentially usable image. Waiting for these ducks to get closer, and hanging out in my ghillie suit or under a blind or whatever, that's kind of where we want to be. For birds in flight, definitely the 1.4 is going to be sharper. It's going to be a little bit better. Here's some of the birds in flight. We're missing focus a lot because these birds were moving extremely quickly. That's not completely, that's mostly user error. That's mostly my fault for my poor technique in this case. But we can see here, this bird was quite far away. It was probably 100 feet or so, and absolutely nailed focus there. So that is a much better image, and this is the raw. I have done nothing to that. I could easily edit that and come out with an acceptable image for sure. All right, so I hope that was enough examples to really just help you see kind of the best and the worst that you could expect from using teleconverters, in this case with the 100 to 500, and just knowing that it's not always the teleconverters. So I showed you the image quality, I showed you the good and the bad, I showed you the examples of, you know, having to shoot too far away and the benefits of shooting really close and getting those crispy details even with the teleconverters. I will say, just from my experience too, this didn't really translate from the examples, but I did have a little bit harder of a time with consistent autofocus with the 2X, and that's kind of to be expected. That's been my experience with using 2X teleconverters for the last 20 years that I've been using them on and off. I typically prefer not to use teleconverters if I can avoid it anyways, but when I do, the RF teleconverters were no different in that the 2X is a little bit softer and the image quality and the autofocus consistency is a little bit less too. It has a harder time sometimes, it hunts a little bit more, and it's not enough for me to be confident as a professional or even as someone who just is going to a place and really wants an image. Using the 2X teleconverter doesn't give me personally that confidence of being willing to miss a shot for the sake of that reach. You know, I think I've proven that putting the 1.4 on and then cropping into the equivalent of the 2X, or just even putting the 1.4 on and putting it in crop mode if you have the R5, those options are going to be much better than, to me, than using the 2X, and you're going to get better quality and you're going to get more consistent autofocus. Not to mention the slight weight savings. The 2X is surprisingly dense. You know, it's going to add that little bit of length and weight to whatever you're putting it on. In this case, the 100 to 500. So one more thing that I want to talk about real quick that is the biggest downside for me on this guy with the 1 to 500 with teleconverters is that you have to be at 300 millimeters, you know, so you have to be right there. That's 300 millimeters, and that's the minimum that will work physically with this lens and the teleconverters, and I absolutely hate it. I'll use it if I have to, but here's where it gets tricky. You know, people asking me, I've had a lot of people commenting on my videos recently, getting in debates and stuff about the 1 to 500 with teleconverter versus the 800. And for me, it's going to be personal preference for you guys. It's going to be, for one, do you already have this lens? Because this lens is extremely expensive. And for two, are you willing to spend an extra $500 on the teleconverter and even more than double that if you want both the teleconverters? Because the 800 back there, this is like, what, $900? I mean, that's the price of both those teleconverters, you know, and or very close to it. And that right there, you know, there's pros and cons to. Normally, you know, when I used to use the teleconverters with the 100 to 400, the EF version, and then the Mark III teleconverters, I didn't have an issue. I could zoom all the way back out to 100 on the lens, you know, and then have it be from 140. But not being able to do this on the 1 to 500 for me personally puts me off like so much. I hate having to have it extended. I hate forgetting that I can't do it and then pulling back a little hard and then hitting that element. You know, for me, that's a big turn off on this lens specifically. So that makes the versatility a lot less. The fact that you can only back out to 300, and then if you're on the teleconverter with that, it's going to be 420 millimeters or whatever it is, you're losing so much of the versatility of having the zoom, which is why I have the zoom in the first place. If you're going for just reach, my personal opinion is I personally am going to go out with this if I know that I'm not going to be able to get as close to the birds. It is a little bit slower, but it's lighter and it's sharper, and the AF isn't going to have an issue. For me personally, that's just how I'm going to roll, because I would rather not have to deal with putting the teleconverters on and off, and I would rather not have to worry about banging it, you know, by zooming out, and all that stuff just drives me nuts. If you're willing to deal with that and you don't want to bring two lenses and you just want to have the teleconverter in your pocket, that's when it is extremely advantageous to have that teleconverter, be able to just pull it right out of your pocket, put it on, and get the extra reach that you're looking for. But in this case, the RF teleconverters are more expensive than their EF counterparts, and that comes at a price. That's going to be more expensive, and on top of that, for the more expensive, you're still going to have all the same problems that you're going to normally have with a teleconverter, and that makes it just a little harder on you to decide whether or not it's worth it. All I can tell you is that if you shoot it properly, or if you shoot the way the manufacturers intended you to shoot with the teleconverter, and this lens in particular, since we're talking about it, the 1-500, yes, you will be able to still get very sharp, very usable, very good images. As you could see from my limited images, I did get a few out of there that I'm happy with in terms of image quality. They're very good. So if you're willing to deal with the price and the extra messing around with putting one on and off and keeping it on you and the potential AF inconsistencies and whatnot, then sure, it's absolutely worth it to you. If you're not, then consider something like this, like the 800. It goes very well. I love having both of them. It pairs very well with the 500 because especially if there's somewhere, if you know where you're going and you know the wildlife you're after, then it makes it easier to decide, well, and you know the conditions that you're going to be in. When I'm going here to Lake Roberts and I know these kind of birds and stuff like that, I know I can bring the 800. I know what the weather's going to be like. I know what I'm going to be able to get out of the 800. It's going to be more beneficial for me personally. If I'm doing wildlife photography somewhere else that I haven't been or I haven't scouted or haven't been doing in a while and I don't know what's out there, I don't know what the weather's going to be like, then I'm just going to bring the 1-500 and I'm going to put it in crop mode if I need more reach. Or I'm just going to crop in because I have an R5 and I have plenty of megapixels. So those are kind of my thoughts. I know that was a lot, but it's not a simple answer. The teleconverters, depending on how you use them, will work really well or really poorly for you. And a lot of people just don't understand how they use them, and then they use them and then they get poor results and they say these teleconverters are crap. That is not true. The teleconverters are not crap, but they have their limits and you need to understand that. And using teleconverters with any sort of zoom lenses, especially slower ones, it's just already putting you at a disadvantage from what their intended use is. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up. It's lunchtime. I got a lot more editing to do. If you guys have any questions about the teleconverters that I went over or didn't go over concerning this lens in particular, the 1-500, leave those in the comments below and I'll definitely try to elaborate on I'll try to answer them and elaborate on my usage as limited as it was for this specific lens. If you made it this far, huge thanks to you. I really appreciate you sticking around. I hope that helped you. Hit that like button if it did help you because that's the best thing you can do for my channel and I really appreciate it. All right, I'll see you in the next one.